2022. And as mentioned yesterday, we're into the first full week of the election campaign here in Ontario. It's the Writ Race, the Ontario Politics Podcast, going daily. And got enough music lined up here. Every week we'll have a different theme. I'm just trying to figure out what the theme for the last week should be. Anyway, we'll get to that. John Wright from Maru Public Opinion is here. Keith Leslie from CH Television also here. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is the Writ Race for Story Studio Network. Just before we kind of get on to the Liberal platform, I do want to kind of have some chat about that. But yesterday, I had the opportunity to talk to Cynthia Mulligan at City News, and Cynthia's a veteran at Queen's Park. You will have crossed paths with her often, John and Keith, and as have I. And you know, I like her stuff because there's a level of there's less commentary and more balance in some of the stuff that she does that I see coming out of other places. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything wrong with commentary or analysis. I mean, that's what we want to do, but when she starts to talk about things like ODSP, and I thought she was the right person to talk to because she spent a lot of time covering it and talks to people who, you know, have to survive on that. And we've all talked about this before, $1,169. It occurred to me, I sent you guys the note, I heard that the Liberals were going to boost ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program, by 20% over 2 years. And then, you know, as that came out, well, the NDP, oh yeah, we're doing that too. And then the Green Party said, we're just going to double it. And then the Conservatives even came out and said, well, we're going to give you 5% more, and it's the biggest increase we've seen in 24 years. And I thought, seriously, that's how you're patting yourself on the back of this? But let's say it was all good news for a second. What is it, Keith, that made ODSP spike to be a priority in the first full week of the campaign?
Well, I think the fact that it was in the Liberal and the NDP platforms, and let's face it, we've been talking about this for quite some time, that this payment level is criminal. And the activists have been, trying to make this case as well, that the government's been ignoring it. And that case was absolutely made less than 2 weeks ago when the budget came down. And again, zero increase in the budget. It wasn't even mentioned. So the most disingenuous news release of the week, or announcement of the week, goes to the Progressive Conservative Party for putting out there, hey, we're going to hike at 5%. When it absolutely wasn't in the budget, and they already promised that would be the very same budget they would reintroduce. So where's this plan come from? It comes out of thin air to try and counter this, because they too clearly realize people are upset once people realize the level of this. And then once they started hearing stories that there are people on disability supports who can't get jobs and who also can't afford a place to live, to the point where some have considered asking for medical assistance in dying, which is legal in Canada. But they're looking at the point of having the state execute them because the state won't give them enough to actually live on. So that's, I think, it finally dawned on people. This is an actual real issue. We talk about affordability as being the number one issue. Well, affordability for everyone's an issue. Think of it if you're living on $1,169 a month. And even if these 20% hikes went through, people would still be living on, with inflation added in, less than they were getting on ODSP under Mike Harris when he cut the rates by 21% over 25 years ago. Nothing has changed. This situation has gotten far worse. So that it's finally getting some attention is fantastic. Mike Schreiner of the Green Party said, you know what? I'm not going to take 2 years. We're going to double it, and we're going to double it right away. Now we know, and Mike Schreiner knows, that the Greens are not likely to form a government this time. But he's making the point it needs to be addressed, and it should have been addressed decades ago, years ago, weeks ago, and it wasn't. So at least it's getting the attention and love it should have been getting all along. But let's face it, right now, we're talking about $14,000 a year to live, rent, eat, everything. That's insane. So the Liberals are saying they're going to take 2 years to increase it by, is it 20%?
20% over 2 years, yeah.
Yeah. Not really going to make a huge difference. Every dollar will help. Every single dollar will help these people. But also right now, if they earn any extra money, it's clawed back. So now they're going to be allowed to earn up to $6,000 on their own. Holy cow. I'm really, really happy to see that this has become an election issue. I'm not sure entirely why. I mean, we can hope that it's because people like us have been banging the drum about it, and loudly, and the advocates, the people that work with the poor, the food banks, they've been making this case for years. That, every dollar spent or given to these people is several dollars less that we end up spending later on. It's cost effective. I know I'm going on and on about this, but I really think this had to be done, and I really think the Tories look just so, as I say, disingenuous coming out. Oh yeah, we've got a news release. The party that didn't even tell us whether the Premier was going to be campaigning on the first full Monday of the election puts out a news release with no fanfare, but we're going to do this. Again, if this is a concern of yours, I hope you're not going to be voting for the PCs.
So when we look at those numbers, particularly the research done for the Daily Bread Food Bank, John, just so happened yesterday I was interviewing the professor who was a co-author of this report, and they talked specifically about the relationship between government policy and food bank visits. ODSP comes up in this report, needless to say, a $15 increase. And by the way, all of these increases are range between $60 a month and $1,200 a month, somewhere in there. But only $15 increase. That's all we need. It reduces food bank visits across the province by nearly 250,000 visits a year. So it really, to Keith's point, kind of illustrates the margin or the lack of margin that there is when people are living under these circumstances. And we even got to the point where this Professor Kneebone talking about the need for food bank visits should be an economic indicator. We should view them as such because they are immediate, and we're seeing the first-hand effect of what, our government program or the lack thereof has on our economy. So I wonder, when we think about, what Mike Schreiner's talking about, we'll double it. Interestingly enough, that number gets close to what CERB was. So when does this conversation begin to really have some muscle and morph back into maybe we should be looking at a guaranteed income?
Not during an election campaign. I have a very different perspective this morning than I did yesterday. Because I was kind of measuring what it was like during the first week, and I was on with Mark Toohey last night for 10 minutes, and it was kind of like the daily catch-up, the weekly catch-up on the leaderboard, and you're looking at the numbers, and you say the Tories are down, holding steady, and the Liberals are up a couple of points, and the leaders, blah, blah, blah. You go through all this stuff. And I left that conversation, and I thought to myself, nothing's really happening on this campaign. You've got a couple of points for the Liberals who've gone up, a couple of points for the NDP. And then I thought about it this morning, and there's no anger here. This is just one big policy wonk fest. This is the party of yes that hears something from the opposition and then says, sure, we'll do it. This is an 81-page campaign platform for the Liberals. That's not a coffee table book. That's a coffee table. We had Andrea Horvath up in the north yesterday. We're going to hire 10,000 of this, and we're going to bring up more doctors of this, and where are all these people coming from? This is, and we talk about, helping people and adding an extra $15 a month. And yeah, I suppose the food bank calculations are correct, Dave, but you and I know that with the increase in gas price in the last month alone, it just eats it. It's gone. The price at the grocery stores are up so much that, I was into Metro the other day, and no wonder that they and Shoppers Drug Mart are making, or Loblaws are making, money hand over fist when you see a roast for $95. What the hell is this all about? I wondered about the campaign at the moment, and that is that all three of these parties have taken this as one big policy walk in the park. There's no anger to throw anybody out. It's not time for a change. It's time for doubling down on, 10,000 more teachers. What the hell is that going to do to help somebody? Because I go back to this, an 18 to 34-year-old person who's got an hourly wage of $25 an hour with no benefits, driving half an hour back and forth to get to the work, and all of a sudden they find themselves out $50 a week, which is equivalent to $400 a month on the gas bill alone. And I understand that, we would normally have this kind of discussion during normal times. But maybe you and I had talked about this, that there's a final part of of the COVID situation, and that's the reckoning. Like all the money that's been spent, all of the pent up issues, like, all of that stuff kind of comes, to bear. And I'm not saying, of course, that inflation is a consequence of the COVID. Maybe it is in certain things, but there's lots of other things driving it, including the war in Ukraine. But it just seems like we're talking about these huge policy wonk issues, and there's nothing about now. I mean, there's Stephen Del Duca standing there yesterday and talking about, well, we're gonna rezone strip malls. In Scarborough, it takes up a lot of space, and we could be putting affordable housing there. And over the next 5 years, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, and I just wonder, at what point do the opposition leaders or others finally say, enough of this, we've got to get that government out because they're not responding to our needs today, and this is what I'm going to do about it. So I think the Bucka ride was a great thing because it cut through that mess and people were talking about it. But now we're back onto this policy wonk election campaign where the government, who always says yes, is just going to say yes to all kinds of other things. And I don't know, Dave, whether there's going to be any sense that there's a need for a change. It's almost like we've just been given this big fat pillow over our face. It's just kind of squeezing down a little bit, and we're a little tired. We're not going anywhere. And I think that if it continues on this way, then the government will win, and that the Liberals will be, the Liberals will be in opposition. But it just seems for the people out there who are having troubles, including the seniors that you're very well talking about, there's nothing in it. There's nothing. And that's why I said earlier, a couple of episodes ago, my sense is that because of that, and it was going into the campaign, that Doug Ford's just going to sleepwalk back into the Premier's office. That's just going to happen. Now, the other part of this, though, is, and I keep coming back to this whole issue of sort of the brand. I mean, what you're describing is everybody's trying to carve out their own ideological space as far as policy is concerned. At what point, Keith, do they actually turn the guns on the real brand, which is Doug Ford? It's not the Conservative Party, it's Doug Ford. And you have to make me mad at Doug to some degree to make this work. And you and I can get as pissed off as we want about ODSP and be righteous about it, but that's not going to get people mad at Doug.
No, and one thing that could, and I'm surprised it doesn't to some degree, is that both the Liberals and the NDP are talking about ending private ownership of long-term care homes. That takes us right to the pandemic. The 4,400 seniors who died in the first wave of the pandemic that were basically abandoned by the government, ignored completely. The long-term care homes were just not given any attention in the first wave. We know this. The government's own inquiry found this. I know the opposition parties want to be focused on going forward. Everyone wants to look forward, but as John said, they're talking about 5 and 10-year plans. Let's talk about something immediate. Let's talk about those deaths in the long-term care homes during the pandemic. This is laid directly at the feet of Doug Ford. I think going pre-pandemic to the first, 18 months of the Ford government where he was slashing Toronto City Council and threatening the notwithstanding clause and doing all those sorts of things, that's past history. He's changed from those days, so has Ontario. But the pandemic is one area that he's hugely vulnerable on. And I know, in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the general polling, no leader perhaps would have done better overall. There's no one we could say, well, that they would have protected this, they would have done better. We don't know. No one knew. And he was facing an unknown, as were all the premiers and all the political leaders. But still, they really, really blew it in the long-term care homes in that first wave. Their promised iron ring of protection was a sieve, and a deadly one at that. And so there's a huge vulnerability. That could become an issue where people would get riled up. There's a lot of families concerned with this. The autism file, where the wait list, basically, not only did kids not get off the wait list, 20-odd thousand, it's now doubled to over 50,000. There's a huge files, but that's not an everyday issue for every parent unless you're living that. So what else do people get mad at? There's a lot of things in the Ford government, but these parties want to be, they're looking, as you say, with all these policies and platforms going forward. And the Liberals with this very, nicely laid out, costed platform with all the nice pictures in it, well, they fired up. I must not have been the only one to buy a Rodium lawnmower this year because they fired theirs up, went over to the NDP lawn and just cut their grass back and
exactly.
forward, put it all in the same sewing bag. And now we have the two opposition parties basically offering the same platform. So how does that excite voters? So then it really is am I voting for Doug Ford or voting for one of these two? So they're splitting their own vote before they get anywhere. And that's exactly, as we've said, what Doug Ford wants. It's why he's able to run a campaign without even telling people where he's going. Showed up in North Bay, did a little campaigning with Vic Fideli. The campaign handed out a couple of pictures. There you go. That's like we used to complain about leaders being in a bubble. That's beyond a bubble. That's in isolation.
Well, I think we get to a point where, though, if we begin to look at this, I just wonder, I'm being facetious when I start about getting mad at Doug Ford, but that there has to be something in there. Dennis Potvin, the New York Islander defenseman, he would always, before the game, he said, "What's your game plan? Go mad." That was his plan. Jump on the ice mad, and he would perform that way. And I think, John, there's probably a little bit of hesitancy on the part of the opposition to sound negative, because we have had 2 years up to our eyeballs in negative. We're just fed up with it. We're tired. I think that's the COVID factor here. There's a fatigue that's built in. We don't want to hear all the bullshit about the mealy mouth stuff that's going on, particularly, for example, in the federal conservative leadership campaign. That divisiveness, I think, is really wearisome for most people right now. And I think at that level, that's a factor in how we're approaching this election in Ontario.
Yeah. But, one is politics. And the last thing, I would think about is anybody in the back room is worried about an 81-page policy book if you're wanting to, get the government out of power, or fully costed. Look, it's fully costed. Wow, there you go. Okay, so again, I go back to this and sort of say there's no sense of urgency. There's nothing on the table in the bread and butter category. Bucket Ride was interesting because it gave something, it cut through that great big marshmallow in the first day or so. How about less a leader? How about have a house? How about saying in the first week after the election, I'm calling the House back and we're going to have a holiday on gas, 10 cents a liter for 3 months. Like what I recall, I watched Don Cousins, who was the member of Markham. And he was a great guy. He's also a lot of fun. But I remember when he was in Frank Miller's quick cabinet, only lasted a short while. He was Minister of Corrections. And it was in the final days of that government. And they were trying to figure out, how do we trip up the opposition? Because they know the fall of the government's coming. So there he goes, and he announces at the Bruce nuclear plant that what they're going to do is have shrimp farms. Is what? Yeah, shrimp farms. Remember there was that whole thing about in Israel, they were doing shrimp farms because of the heat that comes off the nuclear plant, and that they were going to build a prison up there, that they were going to connect with the nuclear plant so that the prisoners could farm shrimps, and that the heat would go through. Like, it was a whole plan, and he said, I'm going to bring 10,000 jobs to the area because there's going to be laundry that has to be done for the prisoners, and we're going to be able to sell the shrimp. And it was just this giant boondoggle. It was just hilarious, when it was the final days of campaign. But you know what? They knew that they probably weren't going to win that vote anyways, and they were going to be put out of power. So there was nothing to lose. And it actually took the Liberals, when they got into power, a fair bit to untangle all of that, because you're taking it away from a community. But it seems like everybody's playing it safe. I guess that's my point. There's nothing to stop you from saying we don't have a fully costed platform because people who are living day to day don't have a fully costed budget. It just keeps going in one direction. It's up. We are the government that helps, and we're going to come back 5 days after the election campaign. We're going to convene the House, and we're going to do this, this, this. Okay, that automatically puts pressure on the government to match that or to do something like that. We're not going to wait to the fall. Wait, we're going to wait until the fall to get a percentage off of the gas. Is that what we're going to do, is wait until September, August, October? No, there's a sense of urgency that's missing here, Dave. And I wonder, it's not so much throw the other guys out as it is kind of like, we get what's going on here. We get that there's a problem in people's households right now, and we're willing to do something. So, let me encapsulate that. You got nothing to lose. It's not about a bit fully costed platform. No one cares. It's about certain things about affordability, and getting things done now as opposed to waiting. And I think that's the sort of thing that people are tuned into nowadays that put a government back on its heels.
Okay, let me ask you, though. Let me ask you, in terms of the urgency, is the lack of urgency among the electorate, and is that what we have to ignite? Or is it among the parties themselves, and they're just happy to, as you say, play it safe? Because we're snoozing. I mean, if you ask people right now how things are going, generally the polling and the surveys that are being done suggest that, yeah, we're okay with this. So just go about your business. So what do you do to ignite that level of urgency? Or do you at all?
I don't know. If I talk to my friends about the cost of gas right now, I mean, I get a real sense of concern. I mean, deep concern about anybody who's traveling in any way. I mean, I have a son that is in the construction industry. And he was back and forth to Godrich this week. He's got a bit of a beater up van, puts all his tools in it, and he goes out and back, right? It's costing him like $500 to $600 in gas a week now. All right, so and his company pays him $200 flat a week for gas. I mean, he's out $300. He's out $1,200 a month. No one's talking to him about what this issue is for him. So, yeah, we're kind of sleepwalking to the polls because we've got nothing but these great big pillows over our face. You know, it's like, oh, policy this and this and this and this, you know, and we're going to do that and we're going to do this, as opposed to there's no urgency, there's no anger in it. And that's where, you know, I credit the Tories for playing this the way they have. You know, they're pushing all the right numbers and they've got it all set up where they're leading in absolutely every part of the province except for Toronto. And that's a safe campaign. But I look at it from the other side, too. And I think that the Liberals have miscalculated. I think the Liberals are not being attack dogs on the things that really matter for me. There's no one sticking up for my son. There's no one sticking up for people who are trying to make a go of it right now. And I think that's what's missing from the campaign. We're the second week in, and it's kind of like, is this what it's going to be like for the next 3 weeks, and it's over? Is that it?
Where's the firebrand rhetoric around, as you say, this cost of living stuff? Where's the promise of we'll investigate these gasoline prices? Is it all inflation? Why is it going up 16 cents at a pop sometimes? Loblaw, it's not just the gas station, of course. It's going to the grocery store that's, you know, frightening for a great many people at this time. Loblaw just reported first quarter profits up 40%.
Really? I know, that's your $80 roast right there.
I thought it was supply chain issues. Profits are up. Come on, like, what's going on? We already know about a lot of profit taking during the pandemic. We're in that recovery / reckoning phase now. Where is the anger? Where's the firebrand politician willing to take on I mean, we hear the NDP complain all the time about, you know, Doug Ford's corporate friends being taken care of. I haven't heard anybody say anything about Loblaw's Q1 in this year up 40%. And as I say, going to the grocery store, as you say, $80 roast, $8 butter. What on earth is going on? There are some issues that people could talk about. There are some issues people would latch on to. As you say, you know, your son driving with that. How about a promise then of some, you know, if you're driving that much to go to work, you drive more than 50K to go to work, we've got a rebate program for you for your gasoline. It'll work in the Fed. We'll work with the feds. We'll get an income tax rebate, some sort of program that's going to offset that cost of you literally just going to work. There's issues to be had, but a costed platform of 81 pages that looks substantially like what the New Democrats are talking about, I don't think it's going to do it. Oh, we're going to build 3,000 homes a week. We built a record 100,000 or just under 100,000 in Ontario last year. That's about 2,000 a week. With the current labor shortages in virtually every construction sector, let alone the rest of, you know, every trade, every sector, where are we going to get the people to do that? It's just unrealistic. And as you say, it's these multi-year things. Let's talk something that's, you know, we're going to help you with that down payment. We're going to take care of this. We're going to give you some real financial help. Not, you know, we're going to address this pie in the sky with supply chain issues.
Look, I think that, you know, the real battleground is the NDP and the Liberal battleground. I mean, Doug Ford is going to be concerned if the NDP vote collapses. But I really, again, I go back to where we talked about this before. There's a cohort of between 18 and 34-year-old people in this province who are just desperate, and they have no hope of buying into something that might speak to a home. They're carrying debt. There's a whole group of them there. You want to get people out to the polls in that cohort, then you got to speak to them. And right now, Del Duca is following. He's fulfilling what he has to get minimally. And I'm not advocating for the Liberals or the Tories or the NDP on this podcast. I'm just telling it like I see it from not only the numbers, but from anecdotal evidence from what I hear from a lot of people. He's going to get his objective, and that is he'll probably be the opposition leader. He'll take it away from Andrea. He will get party status back again, and then his seat. I mean, he's got that minimum right now with 30% in the polls. But where is the short-term gain? Like, where is that stuff for those people who are 18 to 34-year-old with, even with interest rates now rising, who, if you have a home, you're starting to go, oh my goodness, maybe I won't. So there's an angst out there that's not being tapped into. And I get, as I said, I think these are not just coffee table books. These are coffee tables. They've just landed and go with a big thud, and there's no sense of throw the bums out or make a big hard choice. But I can't think of a time that's worse for your pocketbook than now going back to like 1992. I cannot think of a time when it's ever been this desperate that we were screaming and yelling over gas prices. When was it? 3 or 4 years ago when it was $1.35 at the pumps. We're talking 205 to 210 a liter in the next 3 weeks. And it's kind of like, yes, and I've got an 82-page, policy platform that's costed out. And so anyways, I'm just going on and on about this, but I think there's something missing in this election campaign, and somebody needs to take the pool ball and break up this whole thing. And I think the Liberals had something going into this campaign. I think they've lost it, and especially being on for education for 4 days. I just don't get it. I don't.
Well, I just before we go, because I know they're going to have their what qualifies as the first debate today, later this afternoon in North Bay, and this is focusing on issues in Northern Ontario. The cost of living in Toronto is one thing, but you talk about those grocery prices and all that transportation costs. You get outside into the Northern Ontario. Wow, all of a sudden it gets pretty pricey to be able to move around, to get your groceries up there, etc. So you begin to wonder, Keith, when the Tories are looking at low-hanging fruit, they never would have thought of the North the way they do this time. I think where they're going to be able to perhaps jeopardize an NDP riding or two up there.
They're absolutely feeling they've got some real opportunities in some northern areas this time and against the NDP. Ford, I thought, was pretty brazen when he was in Timmins a couple of weeks ago and saying, who is the member? I can't even remember the members. Gilles Bisson had a heart attack that weekend. I don't know if the two events were related, but I mean, he's represented that riding for over 30 years. And he flies to his 16 different riding constituency offices throughout this massive riding. He's done a hell of a job. And Ford Lilly goes into town. They've done nothing for you. It's just why would you vote NDP? It's interesting the fact that they are targeting Andrea Horwath. The Conservatives are coming out and going out at her. They think they've got some chances up there, and who knows? I mean, it's a wide open game up there. The cost of living, as you mentioned, is phenomenal. And that's just the normal cost of living. What if you have to travel somewhere for medical treatment, and you have to travel everywhere for medical treatment, basically, once you're in the north? Someone's traveling somewhere, and, quite often long ways for long times, and you're waiting months to get reimbursed for some of your medical expenses. So we're seeing, the Liberals address, we'll speed up, we'll get it to 14 days renewal, or the NDP, one of the two is promising this to get you reimbursed quicker. There's a lot more needs to be paid. There's a lot more that can be done directly for cost of living in the north. I know they already pay less for, license renewals, these sorts of things. There's a lot more that can certainly be helped directed specifically to the north. The other thing about the debate, the first one being focused on the northern issues, is we'll get a chance to see if people really going to throw some elbows, if they're going to, go into the corners hard here, or if it's just going to be up to this, as we've seen so far, kind of a lackadaisical campaign. Everyone's sticking to their main points. The NDP, Ms. Horwath continually says, we got to get Doug Ford out, but it doesn't seem to be a hammering. There's no time for a change. Because there's no sense that it's a massive time for a change. And I think that's their problem in trying to deliver that message. So will we see more than one leader hammering that message home? I'm really interested in this debate just from that point of view, not necessarily the northern policy issues, which are important, but to see just how rough and ready they are, and who comes out as the strongest beyond Mike Schreiner, who is going to come across as the best one. I tell you this, starting right now.
What's going to be interesting about this debate is that three of these leaders don't like each other. Like, they just do not like each other. There's enough animosity from both the House and outside of the House that you're right, Keith. I'm looking at the personal dynamic. If ever there was a chance for the opposition parties to lay into the premier, it's going to be elbows up. You got nothing to lose, man. Like you've got to start cutting through to this and put, the government and the premier back on its heels. Otherwise, you're going to get through the next debate and everything. It'll be over. So it'll be very interesting to see how this is. Even Mike Schreiner will have to probably amp it up a bit. It's going to be, this is a personal election campaign for many, many people with their personal needs not being addressed. It'll be interesting to see if the opposition parties the leaders decide to make it really personal and take it to them, because, boy, they sure don't like each other. They really, really don't.
Well, it's funny that you should say that. I mean, back to the whole issue about urgency. We don't get this sense of anger at any level. So whether that'll come out, we'll keep an ear and an eye on that later this afternoon. And we'll be back at it again tomorrow. John Wright at Maru Public Opinion and Keith Leslie here from CHTV. Hear his commentary there regularly. I'm Dave Trafford, and this is The Writ Race. It's a Story Studio Network podcast. And just a reminder, we drop this into the On the Ledge feed for those of you who are the regular listeners to the Ontario Politics podcast. But we have also included it in the Daily Brief because, well, we're going daily here. If you've got a thought on what we've had to say, maybe we're missing the point. Wouldn't be the first time. Drop us a note. You can find me on social media at Dave Trafford. That will find me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Otherwise, leave us a comment. Share the podcast. And by all means, feel free to encourage others to follow. So we'll be back at it again tomorrow in your inbox. First thing, it's The Writ Race for Story Studio Network. Talk to you tomorrow.